Morning, everybody. It's great to be back to see you. I've been away long enough that you've forgotten whether I'm good or not good, which is always a good thing. I was just sitting reflecting on the way in which God kind of brings everything together, doesn't he? You see all these kind of different threads together, and God kind of brings it into one picture, and sometimes you can't see it. About 16 years ago or so, I was planting a church called Riverside in Perth, and we'd seen it double in size in a year. And I thought, this is absolutely great. And at the same time, I was doing a postgraduate degree in the States and coming back and forward between the two to do that. And God suddenly, me kicking and screaming, took me out of that to become a Scottish director of Evangelical Alliance, which was this a group of people that have been around for way over 150 years. Who believed that the only way you could see the UK transformed was if there was a unity around Jesus and around the gospel. And so it was never to become a denomination, it was to become an umbrella thing, where people who were different in lots of ways could pray together, share together, minister, and encourage one another. And if you'd known me 16 years ago, you know that I hate committees, and I've got no patience. And I like to just go off and do stuff. I'm somebody who does stuff. And God sent me on this journey. And I was trying to count over the weekend. And in the 16 and a bit years, I preached something like 40 times a year over that time to something like 30 different churches, pretty much. So over 200 churches, and I don't know how many different kind of places and stuff like that I've been in conferences and stuff. And anyway, this is the last time I'm going to speak in a church as director of Evangelical Alliance, because a couple of months back I announced I'm leaving, and I'm doing 3 conferences before I leave, but this is the last time I'm going into a church. Why are you babbling on about that? Well, let me tell you. The postgraduate degree that I was doing in the States was on exilic church and how we live as exiles in the Western world today. And so when I looked at coming here as my kind of last gig for EA sort of thing in a local church setting, and I got the email which said, you know, you can preach on whatever you want, but this is a series that we're working through. We're working through a series on exiles and what does it mean to be living as an exile in the Western world as a person of faith. And I kind of felt, God, you're kind of wrapping this up really, really well. And I could be incredibly nerdy and bore you with lots of stuff about exilic church and what people mean. And I'm guessing you already know quite a lot. You're all kind of almost at degree standard on exilic church. So without trying to bore you completely, I know some of you are thinking too late already, but in case I'm not boring you so far, I'm going to try and give an overview of what people mean by exilic church and why that sort of picture of living as an exile has become such a common one in the Western church, and it's only in the Western church of today. And then we're going to look for about 10 minutes at a passage in Mark where kind of Jesus almost looks like and demonstrates that kind of difficulty of trying to respond to what people are doing where there's a dominant culture and basically he's not part of it. And then for the last kind of 5 minutes or so, I'm going to ask, so what? What does all this kind of theology and Bible stuff actually mean for me living on the outskirts? Is this the outskirts of Glasgow or is this Glasgow? This is Glasgow, okay. You have to forget, I live in Perth. What do I know about anything? Living in Glasgow today, what does all this actually mean, and does it help me at all? So I hope that all makes sense to you. The people in Jerusalem, they had almost no separation between church and state. It was all kind of one. It was assumed that everybody who lived in Jerusalem actually believed the same things, went to the temple, did the same worship. They were the people. There was very little distinction between the kingly rule and the prophetic role. And both kind of came together. And they thought, if we just kind of live as the people of God, then we'll be blessed. We're to be a light to the nations. This is what's going to happen. And God raised up prophets who said to them, listen, you're kind of not living the way I want you to live. You're not treating widows well. You're not treating the poor properly. Injustice is all over the place. And worst of all, you're running after other gods. And it breaks my heart, and it grieves my spirit, and I'm going to send judgment upon you. And suddenly, unexpectedly, by a totally sort of godly rule, the Babylonians sweep through 587 and destroy Jerusalem bit by bit. Bricked, burnt, people massacred, absolutely destroyed, temple torn down, everybody scattered. If you were bright, you were taken back into the Babylonian Empire and scattered. If you were regarded as not very bright or not all that great looking or not having huge potential, you're left to die in Jerusalem. And suddenly people are left now, not in the city where they thought God was always going to protect them and always be there for them and all the promises were going to guard them forever. But now half of them are dead, the city's lying in ruin, and the others are all scattered in this big empire of the Babylonian Empire. And they start to have to ask some questions. They have to ask questions about, what do the promises of God actually mean now that we're stuck here? And what does it mean for us to be the people of God, but no longer in the place we thought we were going to be, but be scattered all over the place? And what does it mean for us to be a minority on the margins of a big culture that don't understand us and we don't understand? What is it like to go from this place of center, where everybody knows, if you like, our story, and everybody knows everything about us and what we all do, to suddenly being essentially a diddy wee group of people who have been overcome and scattered, where nobody cares about your story. And nobody's interested in what you think. And nobody thinks about you as a separate people group. You're just another bunch of people who have been destroyed by a big empire and taken over. And the first thing that the people want to do is they say, God, you've got to come and you've got to slay all the Babylonians and take us back to Jerusalem. That's what we want. What we want is vengeance, God. And so they wait on vengeance coming. And Jeremiah, in chapter 31 of Jeremiah, then kind of writes to the people. And they think, oh, Jeremiah's going to write, even though we didn't listen to him before, he's going to write something we're really going to like now, because he's going to tell us that God is about to send judgment on that culture that is ungodly. Let's smite all the ungodly people. And that's what they hoped. And Jeremiah says, this is what you've got to do. You've got to buy houses. You've got to become part of the community. You've got to live amongst your neighbors. You've got to find partners and have children. You've not to change who you are, but you've got to settle down in this community and be who you are in this strange land. And bit by bit, you live to bless the wider community. And the people hated it. I mean, wouldn't you hate it if this is the people who have killed most of your family, destroyed your homes, taken you and scattered you? And Jeremiah says, for God, he says to them, I want you to bless these people. I want you to live so radically that they will be different because you're there. It's a challenge, isn't it? They will be different because you're there. I asked myself this. I live in Perth, in the outskirts of Perth, and I asked myself this question. Are my neighbours blessed because I live here? In the way in which I engage with them, in the way in which I pray for my neighbours, in the way in which I'm always first to help if something goes wrong. And the people I pass on a Sunday who are all washing their cars. We have a cult of car washing where I live. Every other Sunday apart from us seem to be washing cars when we're leaving for church. But are they blessed because I live there? And then I ask, I'm part of the leadership of a church in the centre of Perth called Trinity. And we've got a kind of brand new cool building, and it's got kind of cool screens behind it. It's got a big platform. You love this. Yeah, it's got a big band of musicians and everything round about it. And I sometimes stop and ask, in what ways are the community and the shops and the people round about us blessed because we're here? How are they blessed because we have been sent here, live here? I wonder if that's a question you ever kind of ask yourself. How is this community blessed, made better, encouraged, supported because you actually gather here on a Sunday or through the week? If you were to do a wee poll of some sort, and let's say did everybody within a square mile of this building and said, what do you think of the folks who gather in that church? What do you think they would say? Would they say, wow, they are such an amazing group of people. They make this community better just because of the fact that they're here? Or would they say, who? What? It's questions that I kind of ask myself. So a person in the kind of 80s, Walter Brueggemann, in a couple of books that I won't bore you with the titles of and stuff, looked at the church in the West, and he said, in the 50s and 60s, almost everybody knew the Christian story. And there was teaching in all the primary schools and secondary schools. And there was a close link between the state and power and church. Christianity was essentially the state religion of the UK and America. He's an American. I said, over the last 30 years, 40 years, Christianity has gone from the center further and further into the margins, where generations are growing up who don't understand anything about the Christian story, where people don't get it, and if they do get it, they have rejected it. And so it feels, Brueggemann said, like people, we have become exiles in a strange land. There's nobody or next to nobody we meet who understands what we understand. We may be the only Christian in a staff room, the only Christian in the street, the only Christian in the workplace. Suddenly, over a generation, we have gone from this place of being in the center, and everybody gets it, and they may think you're a wee bit nutty if you're really committed, but that's okay, to we have got no idea what you actually believe and why. We have no understanding of why Christmas is a big thing for you Christian folks and what Easter is about, except you can get Easter eggs from February onwards. And it's Asda's big thing. And I'm sure it applies to other supermarkets as well. And Brueggemann started to say, so how do you live as a people of today in exile? Because he said some people still think as though they're living in the center when actually they're living in the margins. Does this make sense to folks? And he said some churches still live as if they're in the center and they have rights and they have place and people should listen to them and this is why, and when actually they're in the margins. Just another voice in a whole bunch of marginalized voices in a nation that really doesn't care much about what we think. And so how do you live then? In your street and as a church and as a community, when you've gone from the central place where everybody knows who you are, everybody knows what churches do, even if they don't understand it, everybody's probably been in one at one time, through to a place where most 14, 15, 11, 12, 13-year-olds have never been in church. Most know next to nothing. Most of your neighbours have never had anybody pray for them in their house. Nobody has been a radical disciple in the midst of their presence. So what does it look like? Bruin said that there's only two ways of living this way. He said there's living in compromise or there's living by confession. There's living in compromise or there's living by confession. And by that he said, he really meant you just become like the culture. You know, you try not to be distinctive. You don't say anything. You don't offer to pray. You don't go an extra mile. You don't do all that. You never mention Jesus. You fit in. In the hope of fitting in, you hope people will like you. His thought is if you fit in, people just ignore you like they ignore everybody else. Or you live by confession, which is you know exactly what you believe. And you have to day by day begin to work out what that looks like in this setting, in this new setting. How do I live humbly, mercifully, with love, following Jesus day by day in a way that makes a difference? And that's a huge challenge. Are you still with me? I should have said you can you can ask questions, you can come back, you can disagree. You'd be wrong if you disagree, but you can do that if you want to. And so this kind of overarching, there's a dominant culture or cultures, we would say, I guess in Scotland, a secular kind of culture of sorts in the Scotland of today, and there's a minority culture of faith, different faith groups, and in that minority, which is faith groups, there's a smaller minority, which is a Christian group. So one voice of a whole bunch of voices, which are all in the margins trying to find space. That's where we are. I should say as a subplot, just in case you're worried now, Jesus still wins. The gospel still works. God still makes his presence felt. I needed to encourage you as if you were really struggling there for a minute. But life is different in exile to what it is in the center. And we have to maneuver in a new place. So the passage that I was asked to look at briefly was in Mark chapter 12, which is a kind of demonstration almost of Jesus taking the conversation higher. Later they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you're a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we pay?" But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. "Why are you trying to trap me?" he asked. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought the coin and he asked them, "Whose image is this? And whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And they were amazed by his teaching. So really thoughtful little piece here. The Pharisees kind of hated the Romans but needed them for kind of authority and position. The Herodians loved the Romans because they're part of the Herod family, so they kind of loved the Romans. So you had two different perspectives. The crowd round about generally hated the Romans with a passion as occupiers. And if they could avoid taxes in any way, they wouldn't pay them. So you've got the Pharisees who want Jesus, in a sense, to say, yes, pay your taxes, or that's what their position would be. The Herodians, who are even more strongly Roman in background, saying, absolutely, Caesar is Lord, Caesar is king. And you've got the crowd and most of Jesus' supporters who are saying, tell them no, we're not paying your taxes. Get stuffed. You're occupiers. We don't like you. We don't want you. We're not paying for your war. And Jesus is right in the middle of these two groups with this question that's set up in a way that no matter what he says, it can be reported back about him. It's a trick question. And the language there, to catch him in his words, is the Greek for a hunter setting a trap for an animal to step into. So they're trying to set a trap for Jesus in the midst of it. I love that they say, you're a man of integrity. Absolute hypocrites. They're trying to trap him. They don't like him. They see him as a fraud, a threat. And then they say to him, oh, we see you're a man of integrity. You just teach it as it is. You say it as it is, Jesus. So here's a question for you. Do you stick, Jesus, with the prevailing culture of the Romans and just fit in and give your taxes and bow your head and say Caesar is Lord and do everything that's expected of somebody who's within the Roman Empire? Or do you become a rebellious person and say, no, I'm not doing that. I actually am Lord. Caesar's not Lord. Therefore, I don't owe Caesar anything. All of creation is mine. I don't need to give to anybody. How's Jesus going to go between this prevailing culture narrative and marginalized different culture narrative? And Jesus, with a bit of authority, says, give me a coin. I love that, the tone of that, even in the midst of this. He's the one who's calling the shots here. Give me a coin. And somebody gives him a coin. And you know the story. He shows the head of Caesar on it. And I love this. Whose image is this and whose inscription? Caesar's. Then Jesus said to him, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, because it bears the mark of Caesar on it. So Caesar owns it. Give back to God the things that are God's, that have the mark of God on them, belong to God. Every person, everything. It's a hugely radical, shift-changing statement in Jesus. There is power, there is culture, there is somebody greater and higher. And you have to get one separated from the other. It is lifting the conversation beyond what is right here in front of us and bringing the God equation into it. That God is always higher, no matter what the situation, no matter who thinks they're in control, no matter whose face is on the coin. Give him it. Because that's his. What is God's? Well, we are God's. You're God's. We all bear the image, though scarred, of God on us. And we're told those of us who have encountered Jesus, the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is alive in us. So all of us carry the image of God in us. And we render that back to God in the midst. So what does all of that mean for us now then in Glasgow? Well, I suppose there's a great example of this week and the dilemmas it presses us into. If you've read the Times article on Kate Forbes, which was horrible journalism and character assassination. If you've seen some of the social media stuff, because somebody dares to stand up with a radical Christian faith, she may not agree with everything I agree with, and vice versa, but targeted because she was a minority Christian woman standing for a place of influence and power. Interesting that no other person standing from no other group was treated by the media the way she was. And it would have been good to have a follow-up to Exile, to have Kate Forbes here and ask her, so Kate, what does it feel like living as a Christian woman, trying to live using your gifts and influence as an exile in a place where the culture and the dominant story and narrative is anti-Christian? I think that'd be a really interesting conversation to have, wouldn't it, with her? The truth is, all of us face challenges to live loving towards our neighbor and to live faithfully for Jesus and walk the line where we stay faithful to the promises but open to the people. And how do we do that day to day? I guess we keep ourselves open to the Holy Spirit. And each day we remind ourselves of who we are in Christ, because we may go the whole day where nobody reminds us. In a kind of different thing, I do some counseling stuff that I do. I urge people to get a huge post-it note, one of these big post-it notes, and write on it, I am a child of God. Don't forget it. And then stick it on the first mirror you look at in the morning, so that the first thing you hear every morning and see is truth about you. Because the dominant culture will tell lies about you all day. You remind yourself of truth. Second thing is, you remind yourself of dangerous promises. A writer called Mike Frost talks about dangerous promises. So the promises that Jesus is in control, that the Spirit is with you, that you can make a difference, that you can say to mountains, move, they will move, that this season, cultures rise and fall, Christ reigns forever. And you remind yourself of the promises. And when you're going into the environment that's a challenging one for you, workplace or family or wherever it is, you know what the promises of God are. And you soak yourself in the promises. And then the third thing, and I like this, because you're good singers. I like you, good singers. Mike Frost says, you fill your mind with the dangerous songs. You fill your mind with the dangerous songs. So whatever your favorite songs, whether they're Wesley hymns or whether they're Brandon Lake and Elevation, and you're kind of going for it with a full band and lights and everything that goes, doesn't matter. You fill yourself with the dangerous songs and you carry them in your head. And Frost says the dangerous songs drown out the lies of the culture. So you live in this paradigm of love and grace to a people who don't understand you and have probably never even thought about what you and I believe. And you love them. Day by day, you just keep going on in faithful love, in forgiveness, in grace. Never compromising on who you are or what you believe, and reminding yourself of it, that the kingdom is coming, one life at a time. The kingdom is coming. And bit by bit, in faithful grace, God begins to move. He doesn't change the culture that's all round about you. But what he does is he sets up an alternative culture. It's a kingdom culture. You should be able to find it when you step in the door here. It's about everybody's welcome, not just some. It's about there is no rich and poor divide. There is one people. It's about people helping one another out and praying for one another on Sunday nights. It's about a commitment to live differently. And what it does is, when it is radically different, the people in this dominant culture begin to think, what have they got that I don't? And bit by bit, grace is found. And healing comes. And mercy is seen in the lives of this group of people. And that group of people come and draw and are blessed. And in the words of Jeremiah, you bless the community by being part of it. That's our calling. That's the people. It's not easy. It's not easy. But God is doing new things. My last thought as a kind of last time in a church for EA is this. Everywhere I used to go for a while, people were saying, oh, church is in real desperate trouble. We're all doomed. It was like a Dad's Army advert. We're all doomed. There's no hope anymore. Church of Scotland's closing churches all over the place. It's done. It's done. That's done. In the last 6 months, I've been to at least 20 churches that are growing in Scotland. At the weekend, I was speaking at the first Scottish Church Planting Conference, where over 100 people came together to talk together and pray together about planting churches where churches have been closed, sometimes for generations. Different styles of churches, new styles of churches, and churches and cafes, and churches and homes, and all sorts of stuff. I've heard of more people in the last 6 months being baptized in Scotland than I've heard for 4, 5, 6 years. Now, I'm not saying there's not decline in Scotland. There's clearly decline in the church in Scotland. But that is not the whole story. There are fresh, fragile, beautiful buds of growth emerging in Scotland. God is at work. Not in the same ways as the past, not always in the big dramatic, but in the gentle, in the quiet, in the peaceful, in the one life at a time. God is working. Will you stand with me? We can pray together and I'll hand back. It does occur to me as we've talked about these things that they will be a reality to some of us in this room. That we are the only Christian in a workplace or at home. And that there are constant challenges of trying to live faithfully and love beyond the boundaries. And it's hard for you and painful for you, and sometimes you carry the wounds of it. And so I just want to pray for those who are struggling with the best heart that they can to live faithfully, but it's tough where God has placed you. So let's pray. In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. God who has called us, God who is with us, God who sustains us. Thank you that you love us exactly the same, whether we're on a mountaintop or whether we are in a valley. Whether we are full of faith or whether we are struggling with faith. Your love is constant and lavish and abundant. God, I pray for my brothers and sisters. If any here this morning face that reality of trying to live faithfully in amongst opposition and hurt and confusion, trying to love when love is thrown back in their face, trying to stay faithful when it is just hard. May your presence be with them today. Might you sustain and encourage them. Might you give them a boldness that enables them to remember dangerous promises and sing dangerous songs and stay faithful in your love and mercy. And I pray for this group of people, this community of faith, as they seek to serve you. May they know the presence of Christ, his love, his mercy, his healing, his power. And may they see Christ in one another, hear Christ through the words of others, and together as a community, might they see the kingdom come. In Jesus' name, amen.